Good evening, everyone. If we could start with a moment of silent prayer. Thank you. Can we stand for the pledge?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Alan, you can never leave the board because you're the only
Yeah, I
one
know.
that starts the pledge.
Yeah, I know.
I know, one time I went there and I
I know,
started.
right? Wait till he says
Well,
it.
I had to.
We got to get going.
You're right. Appreciate that. Can we call the roll, please?
Mr. Benton?
Here.
Mrs. Brewer?
Here.
Mrs. Davis?
Here.
Mr. Swager?
Here.
Mrs. Thomas? Here.
Notice of meeting.
This is a public meeting of the Board of Education for the purpose of conducting the school district's business, and it is not to be considered a public community meeting. There is a time for public participation during the meeting, as indicated in the agenda. Each statement made by a participant shall be limited to 3 minutes. Upon request of the superintendent, the district shall make reasonable accommodation for a person with a disability to be able to participate in this activity. A recording shall be made of each meeting of the board as administrative aid and shall be preserved as public documents of the board.
Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
There are none.
All right. Can we get everyone look at the agenda? Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
Motion.
Can I get a second? Call the roll.
Mr. Benton?
Yes.
Mrs. Brewer?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Swager?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas? Yes.
All right. This time we're going to take a motion to move into executive session.
I'll second.
We have 2 reasons for that: economic development and personal.
Personnel and economic development. We can call the roll.
Mr. Benton?
Yes.
Mrs. Brewer?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Swager?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
5:09.
And we will be in executive session. There will be action afterwards. Thank you. Welcome back. We're out of executive session at 6:03. And moving on to the agenda.
Public remarks?
Do we have anyone signed up for public remarks? No, we do not. All right. On to you, Dr. Wagner.
Okay, so we have 3 presentations for tonight. Also, I want to note that Mrs. Davis had to go to a meeting, so she's had to leave the board meeting. The first one we want to talk about is branding and rebranding and provide an update to the board. We have Mr. Derek Yoder here, and he's done a lot of work along with Mr. McDonald. So tonight, we wanted to show the board where we are with and overall. I'll tell you that everything is for the most part done except for the Johnny, which we want to still work on a little bit. And then, so any questions you have tonight, we'll go through, and then later on tonight, we ask you to vote on some things. So if the board approves this later on in the agenda. The first thing that we have there are our colors. And what we have are 2 primary colors. I got to look at the agenda here so I can get the actual Pantones. We have 2 primary colors, and then we have 2 secondary colors. And the red is primarily what the Ohio State uses, and the gray is 2 shades lighter than Ohio State, so it's close. And then we would have our secondary colors as black and white. I know we've talked about that before. So any questions from the board on that? Or, nope. Good. Okay. Next one. This is all Derek Yoder's work. And one of the things happened, and he was playing with the iterations at one point, and we were trying to get the script and some of the font down, and he put a hat on top of the Johnny, or the J, and when we were working on the Johnny one time, and this is really kind of stuck, and we've been talking to different people about it. I know the board has seen this, so we'd like for the board to vote on that tonight. That would be a secondary logo for us. The piece on the right is part of the shield. You see the tartan that goes across there. I know the board has seen this as well too, so we're asking you to vote on that tonight. The shield's interesting because when we've been working on the Johnny, and again, that'll come at a later date, a refresh one. But we started looking at headshots or just torsos to try and shrink the Johnny at some point, so it makes it better in some applications, especially like letterhead and all. And Mr. Yoder developed this shield, and that led us to this product here. So we do like this, and we'll make sure everyone have any discussion or agreement about that. So any questions about the J and the shield? No? Okay. Next. We have some different scripts. We want to make sure that we have everything standardized. So what you see here are scripts. Primarily, I believe, Mr. Yoder, this is used for athletics, right? Yep. So we would have 1 or 2 varieties here to use, or variations, I should say. But that would be our standard. Any questions? Derek, am I missing anything with this? Okay. It's because you primed me on all this stuff. Okay, and then there's some other iterations here. You can see the colors. So here's your primary colors and also your secondary colors and all this. This is in different applications and how it could look. There can be variations on this, but he put this together so we could see what this looks like. Any questions?
Looks great.
Okay, next. And then here again is the shield. And now what we would do is develop shields for all the buildings. Everything would be unified. So this, you could see these on, our letterhead. You would see this on envelopes and all too. Everything will be matching now for all the buildings. If we ever do get to the point where we need another building in the future, we would follow the same path, and we would have future buildings following this. So everything is standardized. Any questions? Okay, is that our last one? Oh, and then we have another script here. Is this the professional one? Yeah. So here's an example of what that will look like, 2 different iterations of that. But again, this could be letterhead.
Yeah, I think the one on the right looks really sharp.
Yeah. Okay. Which one is that? Is that the 4?
That'll go on my letterhead.
4?
Yeah.
On our
No, go ahead. That was it. Yeah, I didn't know what the type. I thought it was a different type font. Okay. Adele. Okay. Forza, that's the one. Okay. 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 That's our last one, isn't it? Yeah.
Very nice.
Any questions from the board? Anything you want to talk about?
Yeah.
So again, there'll be resolutions. I thought it'd be good if the board voted on these so we really can say, okay, this is it. And then if you approve all this tonight, then we'll start using this as early as tomorrow. And we'll be, is there something else I'm missing? Oh, we missing something? What is it? Oh, gosh, there it is.
Thank you. Love it.
Forgot there was an extra slide. So one of the things that happened, I think, Mrs. Brewer, this was in one of the meetings you were in, but we started talking about tipping the hat, and we spent a lot of time on what the angle would be and what looked right, and we started working off this phrase "tip of the hat," and we're actually going to trademark that as part of our work with this as well too, because we feel like that's an acknowledgement when someone does well. Mr. McDonald, actually, I have that superintendent's biweekly. We're actually going to change it to superintendent's tip of the hat and use this as well too. And he's worked with Mr. Yoder and mocked up that already too. So we think this will become part of the brand as well too. It was kind of an organic, well, it wasn't kind of, it was really an organic aspect that came out of these projects. So
Excellent.
I think we've taken school districts very difficult to try to think of what branding we could use. We've taken jokes and we've taken all kinds of things about our school district. This is really tasteful.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all the input. And I don't know how Mr. Yoder does his job because it is, we have seen 17 iterations of one and something else. And Mr. McDonald too have been, really those two have been the ones leading this, collaborating, getting meetings arranged. Mrs. Seibel's been helping others, Mr. Rosenberg. So I appreciate the board and I'm happy and really proud of what we have here. So you'll see that later on tonight and a vote. Okay. Good. All right.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Derek Yoder and Derek Rosenberg.
Oh, wait, I have one more question. Will
Yes.
the tip of the hat be available in our clothing as well?
We can do whatever we want with it. Yeah, it'll go into what's called the brand locker. So we will put it in there. Yeah.
So when do we approve that so that that garment can be produced?
Tonight.
It's all in there tonight.
Tonight.
And
There's
about,
a-
you have
Once
our,
we
I want to know
approve it,
when the
yeah.
order
you
comes
have
in.
our pre-orders for that,
We
right?
have several.
No, I've
pre-orders.
not done any pre-orders. No, there's 3 resolutions.
I'll be in my basement tonight making sure.
So we have 3
Screen
resolutions.
printing
One
for you.
is, you'll see later on tonight, is about the colors. You'll have one approving the fonts and phrase. So there's your tip of the hat thing that comes up. And then the last one will be on emblems and logos. So that's everything minus the Johnny, and we'll work on that. We'll bring that one to you. We'll take that whatever path it takes. It might take 4 weeks, 6 weeks. We'll get that one done though. That one's close, as you can see.
So we're going to, once these are voted on and should they be approved, those that are approved, will we start to trademark?
Yes, they are actually they're all written as trademarks. So if the board approves those, they'll all be trademarked. And there's a little, can you throw one of those up again so and can you blow it up so you can show? Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a little TM on there. No, there's a process. Mr. Yoder knows how to work through all that, so we did. So we've got some. So we'll have that. So everything's right. That's a good question, though, Mrs. Thomas, because we can stop people from using this, and that hurts sometimes our PTO, our boosters, and all too when they have, spirit wear and the like. So we'll be able to control this now. Okay. That won't be allowed. The next 2 big things will be the Johnny once we get that, and then we'll do the whole brand locker, which you'll see this again. But then that'll be everything, including alterations. So. Okay, so there's that. Wanted to talk next and shift gears a little bit on student trips and procedures. And Mr. Busenberg has a presentation on this too. I'm going to let him do most of the talking on this because he's done a lot of the work. One of the things that Mr. Busenberg's working on this year is he's focused on board policies, and we need to do a refresh on a lot of our policies. It's going to take us probably about 3 years, start to finish, to go through all these policies, and that'll include guidelines. But we wanted to prioritize some, and the first one we want to talk about is overnight trips and procedures because that's one that can use some attention. So Mr. Bismarck, do you want to go through and show what you have so far?
Absolutely. Thank you for that kind of introduction. And we haven't seen any trip proposals come before the board yet, but we anticipate those coming. That's why we're really trying to get these things tightened up. So the first thing you'll see in board policy 2340, there are, did I skip ahead there?
Yeah, you want to talk about the 4 types?
Yep. There are 4 types identified in board policy. The first is field trips. Those are trips that are related directly to a course of study, and they are really part of the instruction. So sometimes we use that term kind of universally to apply to all trips, but there is a distinction between the types of trips. So a field trip really is to do with class, and those typically almost always happen during the day, or they may overlap the day a little bit. The next is district-sponsored trips. These are co-curricular and extracurricular. Some examples of those are athletic trips, quiz bowl, choir, band, those types of things. They really fall under the school's umbrella, but they're not actually tied specifically to a class. The next area, which this is a big area, this is an area where we're going to spend a lot of time, is the overnight trips. These can be co-curricular or extracurricular, and they require extensive planning, and these also require board approval. And so what we're looking at is this process of how they get to the board, when they get to the board, timelines, and kind of the planning that we have to do on the back end to make sure that these are good, successful trips for students. So
Is that also a criteria of the application process?
the timeline,
Well, the timeline, but also the person seeking the permission to do the overnight trip. We've had criteria to meet before you can approve that as well.
absolutely, yes. And
We
we're,
had that.
Yep.
I don't want to go into that, but we had some circumstances we needed to be sure that was pinpointed.
yeah,
We have
absolutely.
procedures we'll show you as we go through this, because we don't want things, really the board, things should not be coming to the board that have not been vetted through the administration. And ultimately, it's the superintendent making a recommendation to the board. So we want to get things back on track with that.
And we're looking at some ways to make it even a little more rigorous. So, and the final group, we don't see this very often, but there is a carve out in the policy and the administrative guidelines for non-district sponsored trips. They are for a school employee to discuss a non-district sponsored trip with students. And again, we don't see that very often. The superintendent may grant permission, but does not have to. Any questions about that?
I was just curious what it would be. He said like a trip to Spain.
Like a trip to
Yeah,
Spain.
a
could
trip
be
to
like
Spain.
that,
I think that you may have like a Boy Scout trip, something like that, where the staff member's taking, and then they basically, to discuss that trip at school, they have to have superintendent approval. Like I said, it doesn't come up very often. So an area where we want to spend a lot of our time planning is with overnight trips. These can be in-state or out-of-state. Some examples of in-state would be, band camp that happens maybe 40, 50 miles away, but lasts 3 or 4 nights. And then obviously we have out-of-state trips as well. A couple of the high-level things that we're spending a lot of attention on is travel agents and tour providers, making sure that they are properly licensed, that they are bonded and insured and in compliance with federal laws regarding accessibility. So we'll make sure that's part of every application, that is in writing. That bonding covers basically if they don't fulfill part of their obligation, they're bonded to reimburse the school. The trip proposal sequence, this is something that has come up many times, and I think we can clean up, but that the trip leader should not discuss the trip with students until the request has been submitted and the determination has been made as to whether or not it's going to be district-sponsored trip. And I think that will help the board, it will help the students going on the trip, and just really clean up that process.
We're going to clarify that that's administrative at that point. We don't want the board, these things brought to the board, and you're going to feel forced to make a decision when you don't have all the process that's been followed or all the information is not available.
Do we require them to use a travel agent and or tour provider?
So there is not a requirement for overnight trips to do that. And an example of a time when they don't might be an FFA overnight trip to Indianapolis for it's 4 or 5 kids, 1 teacher, and it's that the travel agent is kind of the FFA program because they book the hotels, and but that's technically not a travel agency. Chaperones is another big area. We want to establish a preference for school employees to serve as chaperones first. And when we have other chaperones, making sure that they have a background check, that they are all board approved, and we may have the ability, or we may require them to do some medical training so that they have some basic, maybe how to administer an EpiPen and seizure medication. Those are all trainings that our nurses can do. So we're not talking extensive medical training, but some training there. And then guidelines and expectations for all chaperones. And those guidelines have the same expectations when they're with students and when they're not with students, and just making that very clear for overnight trips. Next is transportation. That, overnight trips, they're either using school transportation, a charter bus, or a commercial airline. We don't want people driving, students transporting themselves or parents transporting students. Those are the safest ways for students to get to those trips. And finally, financial planning consideration. We want to make sure we have a mechanism to authorize the trip leader to be able to use a district purchasing card in the event of unforeseen expense or urgent needs. Something didn't go right, something comes up. That would be part of the trip leader's responsibilities.
With this address, like the band had come back, spend the extra night.
That's
so
exactly right.
Okay.
Yep.
I just want to
So-
make sure that it gets addressed, because we want to have a way to make sure they have a place
And
to
Dr.
stay.
Wagner has experience.
The district
that.
purchasing card is something we're gonna have to look at some other policies, because we've often used credit cards well too. But the nice thing here is you put a purchase order behind it. So if someone gets stuck, we can put the money right against the card. You also have more control that way. So these are things we're gonna have to talk about, some other financial policies and all too, but this would make more sense. We've taken kids in my last district out of the country for different events that were sponsored. Same thing, we put $10,000 on behind a purchasing card, and then we could add to it if we needed to.
Great. So those are the real high level. As we look at student trips, a lot of our stuff is in good shape, but this overnight trip area is an area we want to focus in. Those are the big areas. I know we'll work through more of this in the future, but just kind of want to give you guys an idea of what we're looking at and how we're trying to tighten this up. And then for Craig, just follow us on social media.
Okay,
Nice.
nice, good. That's good. Just so the board knows, so.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank
The
you.
slides. Just so the board knows what we're going to do. There's some trips that are supposed to be coming to the board in October. So from a procedural standpoint, the board approves policy. The administration has to implement those policies and develops guidelines from those. We have policy now. It needs to be revised, but we can't turn it that fast. But we're going to take what you see in a presentation. I'm going to make administrative guidelines as used to be at the superintendent's office, and we will be using these standards the best that we can before we come in October. And then Mr. Rosenberg's not been looking at policy, but some samples from other school districts that have some good models from this. So that's what the administrative guidelines will be built on. And then we'll kind of put the cart before the horse, and we'll be looking at policy on this, and then if we need more revisions to the guidelines. But this, what you're seeing, will significantly tighten things up.
Great. Thank you.
The last presentation is on student enrollment and forecasting, and we started this last year. If you recall, we started this presentation, or we put together a presentation last August, so we wanted to update that for you. And just about 3 slides. So this is the district's history of enrollment, and we can now consider 2023 or June of 23 what's there. That's the actual data now where we ended the school year. So it was 1629. So one of the things I want to be clear about is these numbers represent the students who are being educated every day in the school district. So for example, I don't remember the number off the top of my head. I know what it is. I think it was about 45 students going to C-Tech this year. I know we have 55. They're not included in that number of 1620 in the schools every day. If we have students who are going full-time to College Credit Plus, they're not in there as well either. If they're in a blended situation where there are some in CCP, we didn't really split the difference or whatever it is. We just called them in the district there. So that is what you see historically. Next slide. So then what we have here are projected enrollments, and what we look at, and last year when we did this, we ended at 2030. Now we have 2031. I still want to, this is really pre-Intel still. This is just based on the growth trend. Kim uses some software called Forecast 5. It looks at some things about survival rates of students in our school district, about how, do they stay from K through 12, who's moving in at what levels. It looks at trend, it looks at birth rates, new housing permits, and the like. So that is data that's just updated now. Any questions about those projections? Because again, that's all pre-Intel, as I like to say, because we don't really have a lot of good data that tells us about what the influx is. Okay, next. And then this is something we developed last year too, and this is important when you think about that last slide. What we put in place here are what I like to refer to as fill rates, and we can look and see when the buildings are at their capacity. If you look in 2026, so that would be the 25-26 school year, that's probably some of our best data there as we look ahead. I'll start at the bottom with the high school, and you can see the high school is really at capacity. The current high school has a capacity of 550 students, so we're nearly 100% based on this projection by the 26 school year. The other buildings have some room to grow, as you can see, but there's not a lot of room there in 2026. If you move forward to the 30-31 school year, which is as far out as that graph takes you, you can see the fill rates and how things become significantly different, especially at the middle school, we're getting close to 100%. The high school is operating at that point at almost 115% capacity, but that assumes there's no addition on the building, and we know that we can add 150 student addition on the building. Any questions about that? Kind of as a related matter to this, we all know that there's some economic development projects that are occurring in the area, and some are being proposed and proposed zoning changes. So as we all at different levels have been working closely with the city and possibly developers. I was hoping the board could talk a little bit about some of those thoughts we have and what you want me to relay forward as we're working in some of those projects, because on Tuesday I was at the planning and zoning meeting, and one of the things that I said publicly when I was asked if the board would like to manage the size of the school district and try and keep us at one high school, one middle school, and that we do not have a desire to, like some other central Ohio districts, to get into multiple campuses, multiple high schools, too. Nothing against those districts, it's just not our master planning as we see it. So I was hoping to engage in a little discussion and any thoughts you have that and so.
development or the development or activities of growth that's completely the challenges that we face as we run.
Sure. If when you see the model, we can modify or update the master planning. The thing that is the most difficult to plan because it happens so significantly is multifamily developments that can bring in a lot of students in a short period of time. If we have a housing development that's staged over 5 years, or something, you can react to that. But now the multifamily that's being proposed now as part of the annexation, which we've been involved with and at least consulted on, that is not projected to bring a lot of students to it. It could be up to 1,200 units. This is not something the school district endorses, but it could be 1,200 units, and the estimate is about 60 to 70 students would come out of that development because it's primarily built toward employees, is what it is. So it's not really family friendly, although I don't think it would restrict. Part of what your question though begs is timelines for development. Mrs. Boer, like when you're talking about, we know that we probably will need some future builds. Roughly in this environment, it would take about 3 years to build a high school if we had to do that. To put the addition on the high school, 1.5 years, so we're going to have to think about that relatively soon, I would say. The good news is because the high school is built the way it is and because the architectural plans are there, there's not a mechanical room needed, so it's really just adding on those 6 classrooms. An elementary school, if we had to build an elementary school, 2.5 years from design all the way through. And I'm saying it conditionally because, it's all going to be market conditions and, availability of workforce and, factors we wouldn't know until we get into a building process.
And I think it's important to note that as a board, we've made it clear that we feel it's imperative that any growth pay for these expansions needed, that there should not be any additional taxes or tax burden put on our current residents to afford to build any of these additions. So the economic growth that would necessitate any type of additional housing that would cause us to have to build additional classrooms needs to bring in enough dollars to the district to pay for this, not only the capital, but the operating expenses as well. So that's when we're looking at the overall economic growth plans. That's what we're really focusing on, is what dollar amounts come into the district as a result of that, and will that afford us to be able to build the necessary things and staff the necessary rooms without additional taxes to our current tax base. Because we've been clear that I don't think Johnstown residents should pay any less because we have economic growth, but they certainly shouldn't have to pay any more as a result of it. So that's one of our main tasks when we're dealing with these economic developments, is to really look at making sure the school district is getting enough of the economic development dollars brought in to pay for the resulting influx of any students while remaining with one high school. So that's a lot of challenges. And that's what we're focused on. Because if you see other communities, and the reason Dr. Wagner said that, we as a board have the philosophy of the one high school because we feel like this community is a community. And if you build a second high school, you divide a community. And we have no desire to do that. So we want to make sure that growth, and everyone understands that as we build and grow, while we might add classrooms and we might add size, we are not entertaining the idea of ever expanding to a second campus or a second high school.
Well, the transportation on the infrastructure is what you've talked about too. If you come to a baseball game or a football game in Johnstown or a performance of PAC, it takes you an hour to get out of the complex. So that may be stretching it a little bit, but that could be our future. We don't want that. So again, those commensurate dollars, if whatever the economic plan is, if it doesn't produce economic sense for us, we have to really hold our positions. So I like the fact that we're a united board and how we feel. I think that's safe to say. I think you articulated it well.
I do want to mention that the city council has been working tremendously with us on this. So it's not like we're facing any opposition on this as a school board. They're working hand in hand and have a similar vision as us. So it's not something that we're independently believing as a school district. This is a community decision that is also fostered through our relationship with the city council, who ultimately are the decision makers on these. We're influencers. They make the decision. They're the ones that vote to approve these things. And we're very pleased with our relationship that we have with the council and the direction that we're going on these.
And that we're included in the discussions. That's really relatively new for us, and we're thrilled to be a part of the table.
Any thoughts as I work with area groups and getting the thoughts of the board?
As the other board members have said, we all have agreed and worked collaboratively with the city. And also, we definitely feel like one high school, one middle school, one elementary. We really are focused on that. We also do not want to be a burden on taxing. So we have a lot of thinking to do, a lot of vague things to do to get to that.
So from the board's, I will, we have this enrollment data updated and we'll keep watching it. Obviously, there's the annexation. What I'm thinking about is we probably can get a document for the board to look at, or maybe to publish. I'll need some work before them in December. We could look at longer range, like how big do we think the district could become by staying with, one high school and all two. There is some room for expansion, but again, we want to keep that contained. And I think what we talked about at one of the work sessions, maybe put a target as well, to try to cap the size of the district. And I think that would provide a lot of guidance for municipalities as they engage in their work as well. So that sound good? I'll get probably something, no later in December. I'll get something to the board so we can actually push it out there and show you, how big the buildings could get in some different configurations.
No, that'd be excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for those comments, because what we'll do is we'll relay those comments when we're working with developers and also continue to work with the city, because that's been great. And we're starting discussions, by the way, with the townships as well, too. So, all right, that's all I have for presentations tonight, unless there's questions.
I have none. Moving on to board committees.
So we had buildings, grounds, and safety. I think, Mrs. Thomas, are you reporting on behalf of the group? That was on August the 29th.
Yes. So we did meet on August 29th with Dave Jenny, Mrs. Seibel, Mr. Rosenberg, Dr. Wagner, and discussed what was going on overall. There were some concerns with the HVAC issues at the JMS, as well as at the gym. We discussed some alternatives that Mr. Jenny's looking into there. We have bidding going on right now for baseball and softball. There's some potential safety concerns at both of the fields, and we've reviewed those, put them out to bid, and I think they are due back in this September. I don't know the date exactly, but at the end of September we should have those back and be able to review them with Dave Jenny. And then we also last year did we had a person come in and do a safety assessment of all of our schools. We're going to go ahead and do that again this year. From that report, we were able to initiate some things we were already doing. And so we want to just see, since we have done some of those things, we've added some grants.
Door security, right? And
Security.
cameras. Yeah.
So we have some new things coming in that are already installed, so we want to see how that goes with the safety review. We also had some refrigeration issues and freezers, which we're putting in a 24-hour notification system, and people are going to get pings and temperature drops at a certain level. And I guess we've had some severe issues with those freezers, so we're hoping that.
Excellent. Thank you.
Curriculum, I thought Mrs. Davis was gonna, can you cover that, Mrs. Thomas, or do you want me
I
to?
would love to.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
I have the notes prepared for
Sorry.
that. We had a great meeting though. We had the math coaches join us for that, and they are very excited. Gave us some great reviews of the math program already. For 6 weeks in school, 5 weeks in school. So they were already working with the teachers. They were working with the students. We talked about the science. I'm trying to go.
Yeah.
We talked about our science review. Mrs. Seibel had already given done some evaluations on that. Science is a little bit different than math and reading because there aren't a lot of K through 12 science programs. You might pick from one spot or one company or grade level. And one thing to note, just for the record board now also, all of our teachers were certified. We approved that in May. April and May, and all of our teachers were certified.
Wilson? Wilson.
So that was huge. So also initiated a program and studies with that this summer too. So we just want to thank the teachers for the initiative and support.
Excellent. Thank you again. And moving on to insurance.
So we'll have that on the 25th. So.
Yeah, I was joking.
Oh,
'cause she
okay. I was
was-
gonna say, wait a minute. I'm like, wait a minute.
I was just going to let Ann keep on talking every
Make up something. We have a
No.
meeting September 25th.
Yeah, we'll have that. And then, it's, believe it or not, we're going to have to get ready for renewal. So we'll have our insurance committee for that. And then policy, Mr. Benton, do you know if you're available on the 27th? Oh, you did? Okay, sorry. So then we'll have policy too. So we'll have that to report at the next board meeting.
And Ruth Ann and I were up here. I don't know. I felt like I lived here last week. I think I had 5 meetings here last week, but most of it was on the strategic planning and economic development that we
Yeah.
spoke about. So we don't
Yeah.
really have an update other than what we already shared.
I didn't put a date in there because it was all
Yeah, it was every
fragments of
day.
meetings
Right.
and talk to the city. And yeah. So, okay.
All right. Moving on to the consent agenda.
The consent agenda is number 2309-132.
Can we get a motion?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
You want me to zip
Yep.
through these real quick? Okay. Kim, anything with the treasurer's report or appropriations you want to?
No, the permanent appropriations are the annual, final appropriations. We've been operating under temporary. This is the permanent
Okay.
ones.
Thank you.
And then we have board minutes there. I want to thank Noah and Debbie who are sitting over there because with Kim, working, helping us as a consultant, they picked up a lot of some of the responsibilities as well as Holly or you've been working on these board minutes.
Well, I need to
and stuff.
thank you too, because you took notes in one meeting. It's quite humorous.
Oh. All right.
Ms. Douglas. Ms. Douglas.
I called one of the board members Douglas instead of Mitt because you had I just talked to you earlier in the day, so I was starting to say it myself, and they filled in the gap. So this is the joke, but we do have an Amanda Douglas, so it was just reflexively coming out. So this is what they're talking about. Yes, sorry. We'll move on quickly. Let's talk about something else. So the next item is an agreement for special needs services for a student. We have a district tutor. You've approved some in the past, and we just had another person, so as they come on. Unpaid days, we don't have reasons for that we published, but those are both situations are recommended for board approval. Supplemental employment, we have Deb Merrill for junior class advisor. That didn't come earlier to the board because we didn't fill it actually, and administration talked with her, and she decided to do it again. So she's going to do that. Pupil activity employment, we have that set up, and then volunteers. We always appreciate volunteers, and there's quite a long list there. So that's all of executive session. That's all of the consent, unless there's questions.
Any questions, comments? Call the roll.
Mr. Benton?
Yes.
Mrs. Boer? Yes. Mr. Swager?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
I do want to thank the volunteers as we normally do. Nice to see a few names back on that list that had not been on there for a little while. A couple of my neighbors volunteering. Always nice to see that as well.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Mr. Brickner does a nice job, trying to get that organized because it's not only the core positions we have and the assistants, but volunteers offer a lot too. So there's a lot of coordination there. Mrs. Lowe does the back end of making sure we get everyone background checked and all together.
Excellent. Thank you. On to the treasurer's recommendations.
We have 4 donations.
One is a monetary donation for the April Booning Scholarship. The second is our annual anything remaining from the senior class that just graduated gets passed on to the junior class of this year to help offset their expenses going forward. The Ohio High School Athletic Association made a donation to the district for the softball run to help offset some of our expenses. And then there's also an anonymous donation for supportive families that are in need.
I got a question. Well, first, can I get a motion?
Second.
Thanks. The donations of funds, it goes from class of 23 to the class of 25. So it goes to the sophomore class? Is that the junior class? So this senior goes to next year's junior. Is that,
Yes.
we just always skip the year? Is that how that
Yes.
rotates?
Yes, because prom is the biggest expense, so that helps to offset.
So it helped offset the
Junior
prom. Okay. I was curious how that always worked every other year. So the senior class has the year from the 2022 money, so we always just leave for all.
Yep.
Okay. That's the only question I had.
And then what happens when there's funds left over on the class? They just goes into
So the class of 24, when they graduate this year, if there's any money remaining, will go to this year's sophomore class as they rise to
So
juniors.
24 to 26, 25 to 27. So it's always going 2 years behind.
So does that mean that our class fees possibly should?
No,
too
this
high,
is
or-
all related to the extracurricular piece, prom, graduation expenses.
I understand that, but we're still charging class fees that are going into this
No.
class fund.
None
Class
of these
fees go
come
to a
from
different
that.
place.
What are the class fees?
They go into a
Because we've been told they're raised for
no. Class fees are just for elective classes. We don't charge class.
there's a class fee for. every
Oh, yes, that's like the $20 that they class
Dues.
dues.
class.
Class dues. I'm
Thank
sorry.
you, Mrs. Almendinger. Class dues.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Sorry, I
No, I
misunderstood.
was using the wrong terms.
Yes, there are class dues that get charged for the senior class. That pays for the Cedar Point trip, and that kind of fluctuates on how much it is going to cost based on the transportation and those types of things. So they could be reevaluated, but unfortunately, you just don't know what things are going to cost until you're already into them. So I think they'd rather err on the side of having too much than having too little, which I understand it's an expense for the families, but
One of the things that I've talked with some of the board members about and our objectives for this year is looking at all asks of parents with fees and all, including some of them are tangible, bringing in Kleenex, and it's just time to review that. And so we'll do that this year. That's one of the objectives we have. So we'll get back to the board at some point about that, potentially making changes for the next school year.
right?
Our desire is that the asks of the parents for class fees and cover exactly what we need. We shouldn't have any carryover year to year. I mean, I get it, a few dollars here and there, but we don't want to see it growing.
Mhm.
If so, we need to lower those fees if it starts to grow. And same thing I'd ask in these class-to-class funds. If it starts to grow too big, then we should reduce the fund, the fees for a few years and let it come back down. I get it, some parents, but it's not the school district's goal to build funds up for these extracurriculars and just hold the money. It should just be covering just enough and then having a little, what I'll call seed money for the next class to start to pay for theirs. But
To have a surplus.
Yeah.
and not-
right,
Usually we could develop a cash policy around these funds and decide what's the minimum and what do we do with it. But even just back to class fees, we're going to look at bringing in the tissues and
Right.
we want to look at all that monetary, physical. So that's on our list. So I imagine probably early in the next calendar year we'll have some things so we can get that organized for the coming school year.
And then along with those same terms, you know, asking for class dues for senior public for a trip to the board,
You're right, but that's because of what I showed you earlier that I have not brought those forward to the board. Typically, those would come earlier to the board, but we became aware of some procedural things that we wanted to look at. The trip to Orlando, for example, there's some work to do with that company, and we want to make sure we have better processes in that because we found there's a reimbursement coming, and I think it's coming next month in October. But we just need to catch those things. It's not anything was wrong, but it's just I don't like the process, so we're going to tighten that up a little bit. So that's my fault. I used to say my fault, but I didn't bring it to the board. It should have come months ago, but we wanted to do this part of it first. So
I would just ask on these funds, on this donation funds, I have no clue how much they spend in a normal year, but we should set a cap of how much percentage we carry over. So if we carry, just say they spend $40,000 a year, this may be 10% of that. Is that a reasonable number? If we could set what a reasonable percentage of carryover is,
okay.
I think that'd be the way to go on these funds. So you have enough to cover, but not too much.
We could look at growth metrics too, about how much each class grows,
Right.
based on our data. So that, there's always had like a cash policy or something, some kind of,
Right, because
Yeah.
you got smaller and
Yeah.
bigger classes, so it's going to be
Yeah.
a different fee.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
it's not
I
perfect
appreciate it.
science, but having a little bit of a tighter
Yeah.
model there, and that's why I said we can look at
Just
a
a
policy.
guideline that we can go by.
Yeah.
Know we take action
Yeah.
when it hits that above
Yep.
that percent.
Yep.
Can we call the roll?
Mr. Benton?
Yes.
Mrs. Boer?
Yes.
Mr. Swager?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Superintendent's recommendation.
Resolution 23-09-134. This is asking the board to approve official Johnstown-Monroe colors for branding purposes. They're listed there with their hand tones. You can see, well, red is the 200 and the gray is the 427, and their secondary colors are traditional black and white.
Can we get a motion?
So I'll second.
Ms. Boer motions. Ms. Thomas seconds. Comments? I mean, obviously, thanks for all the work on this, and thanks to the team and Mr. Yoder and everyone else that worked on this. I think it looks great, and I have nothing else to add. We've seen quite a few.
I think it looks good. It's sharp.
Yeah, I'm excited, and I think everyone's waiting on it. Thank you. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Benton?
Yes.
Mrs. Boer?
Yes.
Mr. Swager?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Resolution 23-09-135 is approving official Johnstown-Monroe fonts and phrase for branding purposes. So it's the fonts that you've seen already, and also that phrase "tip of the hat," which we want to trademark with our Johnstown logo here.
Can I get a motion? Can I get a second?
You were the one that worked on it, Ruth Ann.
Okay.
Right,
second.
right.
I just
I
want
mean,
to make sure it passes.
It's your
Yeah.
phrase.
Yeah, I
No,
know.
no.
Ruth
All right.
Ann did a lot of the work.
Yeah.
Stuff that we were pretty thankful
Anything else? Call the roll.
Mr. Benton?
for. Yes.
Mrs. Boer?
Yes.
Mr. Swager?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Resolution 23-09-136 is approving official Johnstown-Monroe emblems and logos for branding purposes. So this is the J with the hat, and then all of our brand family that you've seen already, the shields and all that you saw tonight, and they're in the backup for the board agenda if you need it. And just as a reminder, we are refreshing the Johnny, but the current Johnny that we have will still be a classic or retro, so we're actually going to allow that one as well too. Okay, but I'll bring that to you in the future.
Can I get a motion?
So moved.
I'll second.
In a second. All right. Call the roll.
Mr. Benton?
Yes.
Mrs. Boer?
Yes.
Mr. Swager?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Any additional board comments?
Just it's a great day
Yes, it
to
is.
see this moving forward. It really is. Some standardization, and no more expression of, well, they use this color and it's not the right color. Now we know. It's good.
All right. Thank you very much. And back to you, Dr. Wagner.
Just a couple things real quick. September 11th, we have student recognition. I wanted to tell you that in all the buildings, they started their day with some recognition, a moment of silence and all too. So I have all that if you're interested, but I just think it's important in our country's history to make sure we recognize. So I was proud of everything the buildings did. I was actually at JIS, of course, so I could hear that in the moment of silence and the way it was read, and then also having developmentally appropriate ways to express it at a elementary versus a high school level too. So it was well done, and I think it's important, again, we don't forget those things. District report card, I sent the board some information. Our curriculum committee, when they meet, this will be one of the core issues that we focus on. Overall, our report card looks very similar to last year. I was a bit surprised actually because I've seen the back end data. We've done some analysis on that. We actually made some very good progress this past year, but the state is combining 2 years worth of data. And so our report card, it looks about the same. Achievement's exactly the same at 4. Graduation is a 5, so that's the top of the scale. It's the same as it was. Progress is a 2. That's the same as it was the previous year. Early literacy did drop from a 4 to a 3. Mrs. Seibel and I have been talking to the state. There's something in the algorithm that might not be right. It's not going to change our data, and I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses, but we have to look deeper in that. They may have found a problem with the way the formula is, because in the data that we reviewed already, 90% of our students or children are coming to school ready for kindergarten already. So it doesn't make sense, and they said that as much to us. So we'll look at that. Gap closing was a 5, which is what it was last year. College, career, workforce, and military readiness. They're starting to roll that out. So there's a percentage there. One of the things that's going to, I don't want to say hurt our district, but it's going to impact that is it will include the number of students taking the ACT and SAT, and that also affects national rankings. When you look at some of the information that's out there, the more students that take those 2 tests, it does have an influence. So we'll have to look at that, but I think we'll have to look at the overall score as it develops, but we're going to look at behind the scenes too, because I think it's a bit unfair in this current environment, even for us regionally, that we might have more students going directly into the workforce, into our military, and then we might not get the same round of score of that, but that doesn't mean we're doing any less. So I think that's something we'll have to watch. But overall, again, the curriculum committee will have more data we'll bring back, but our progress this last year, again, for 2 years, you're not going to see it in the overall aggregate, but in the area of math, wow. I mean, I was, again, we'll dig into this, and but the amount on the gain index that we have seen is just tremendous, and I really am proud of the district, and thank you again to the board for supporting what we did, and we put some efforts in place. It about came together in January by the time we got through all the data, and then we put that math focus together. We obviously adopted a new math series. We have math coaches. We have consultation from the Educational Service Center of Central Ohio. So I'm very excited about the future. And as you noted, Mrs. Thomas, that our curriculum cycle is such science is this year. And then we'll possibly look for adoption. And then we have a cycle that will be ELA, social studies, and then we'll get to specialists. But I think that I want to be careful what I say, but I think we'll be sitting here a year from now very happy if they're going to aggregate 2 years again. If we replicate this coming year or this year what we've done this past year, I think you'll see significant
Do we know
changes.
they'll aggregate 2 years next year?
Well, it's interesting because I looked at this at years ago. They actually did 3 at one point ago. Years and years ago. The report card changed. I don't remember what year it was. It was 15, 16. They changed. That's when we went to letter grades and all. So they started doing 1 year, and then they aggregated 2 and 3 years. So I get it, because some of the ideas that you have a bad year, it doesn't affect them too much. But I really wish they didn't do it this year, because if I could show you the 22, 23, well, again, we'll look at it. We'll bring it up to the board. So I do think that when we disaggregate some of this, and again, in the math, I do think there's a message in here that we can really celebrate that we can do this, and more is coming from this district.
That's great.
Our own assessment, is with that. In other words, you can look at it and say it's really growing our money, we're investing in that area. As from the state, you can show that to us from the state.
Yeah, and I'll use the state data to do that, because I'll disaggregate from this larger. But I can show you in the area of math, for example. They use this STAR system, and we'll do this at another meeting. But statistically, when you look at this data, it's not proportional in how this all is unfolds. So the difference sometimes between a 1 and 2 and a 2 and a 3 isn't as linear as it would seem. So, and there's a value-added component. The state actually does an analysis. They use a company for this. That's proprietary. But I tell you all this because I can see that we had a gain index of over 4 in math, and we added 2 stars in there. So there's a qualitative aspect to that. We'll see other places where we add 3 point some percent of the, or 3 point something on the gain index, and it'll only be like 1 star. So, but the math is the one by far that showed. So I think that's reinforcing. But we'll get a lot more data, because it's, the thing is I don't want to put too much in the report card, because it's a point in time, but it is the public facing, what people see, and it means something. We also have a lot of internal assessments or district assessments we use, like iReady and some other things, and we'll bring that forward to the board. Yeah. It is exciting though. Again, it's not going to show here in total, but you'll see in the next board meeting or two, we'll disaggregate some of this. And it's impressive. Compensation agreement, City of Johnstown. Just want to tell the board we're continuing good strides there. Some of the discussion is even accelerated now because of the potential building project or the economic development project, the annexation we talked about. I'm so glad that we started on this project a while ago because we're getting close to settling that. Ideally, and I think we're still on this path, would be that this month we could potentially end up in a conceptual agreement with the city, and that may ask for a joint board meeting and council meeting in October, where hopefully that, or it should be planned that the council and the school district would vote together on that, and that would help us. So the idea there, if you're not familiar, is that it's just so that the city, when there's prospective business coming in, they already know what the school district's agreement is, and we're not losing a project that could go somewhere else while there's 4 to 6 months of negotiations. You'd have a template to work from, and we have that model with the city of New Albany. And we're also starting that discussion with the townships as well too. So, but the city will come first. As a reminder, we have the fireworks and football game on September 22nd. So that's coming together. A lot of effort there from Mr. Busenberg and Mr. Brickner and Mr. Jenny and all too, to keep everything organized, and all of our city partners there. Intel is having a Harvest Fest. This is invitation only. I sent the board a copy of that. So if you check your email, you have to register for it. Security is going to be very high because it is the data center. What it'll be is we won't be outside the building. If you remember last year on the groundbreaking, we were outside and we had to step out. This year it'll be all inside their kind of tent facility, if you will. Our band is asked to present just one song. We expect the governor's office to be represented as well too. So it's 5 o'clock on September 24th, which is a Sunday. So if you haven't already, check your email and let me know if you can come, and I'll get your name on the list, but you'll have to register then too. And then we have to work on transportation because no one's allowed to drive there because of the security of the site. And again, just for the public listen, that's invitation only. It's not my doing, that's just what I'm telling you. And I think that's it, unless the board has any questions for me. Yes, that's a week from Monday, and then we'll have policy on there and maybe a little insurance because we will have had that meeting by that time, and then some of the report card as well too. We have. I have to remember. I think those are the 3 things we have on the agenda right now.
Okay.
Well, actually, the
I got an update today. The Wall Street jobs might not be ready. They were supposed to be ready, so that might be into October. But there's enough there that we can look at with dental and some of the trend we can still look at even if the renewals aren't available, because we're going to need multiple meetings.
Making a motion to adjourn. Can I get a second? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Benton? Mrs. Booher? Yes. Mr. Swager?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.